My name is Berg. I'm an immigration attorney, practicing immigration law about 29 years now. And my focus primarily is on family-based immigration, deportation defense, and do a lot of work in the courts. This is my first time in this beautiful place. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here tonight. You know a little bit about me. I'd like to know more about you. How many of you are immigrants to America? Raise your hand. ¿Cuántos de ustedes es inmigrante? ¿Es usted inmigrante? Su mano arriba. Keep your hands up. How many are the children of immigrants? Keep your hands up. And the grandchildren of immigrants? Great-grandchildren? Native Americans? No? Put your hands down. Just about everybody is an immigrant, first, second, third generation that's here this evening. You know, we're a nation of immigrants, built by immigrants, and continually enriched by a flow of immigration. Those are not my words, those are the words of Richard Posner, the former Chief Judge of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, in a very important case that I had the privilege to work on called Salanita versus INS. But at the same time that we're a nation of immigrants, we're also schizophrenic about it. Because as you heard earlier, and Ryan showed you the chart, we're deporting on average 1,100 people every day. Men, women, and yes, children. 1,100 people a day, 420,000 in fiscal year 2012. Mark talked about some of the positive economic aspects of immigration and what we would have if we had immigration reform. But think about the opposite of that. What's going on right now? We're spending $16 billion a year detaining, deporting, and keeping people from coming back. $16 billion. And each one of those persons being deported, whether they're being locked up or they're on the bus or they're on the plane, is not paying taxes, is not working, and is leaving behind children like these children may be left behind here if their father gets deported, which looks like it's going to happen. So that's the reality of right now. Sister talked about the humanitarian aspects and our brothers and sisters. And if you haven't been there, I invite you to come any Friday morning at 7:15 at Broadview, where we see families being ripped apart. And we pray for them. We pray for those people still being deported. And we recommit ourselves to pray, hope, and work for compassionate immigration reform and an end to this horror that you heard about today and that you see and you hear about every day. I want to talk a little bit about the legal, the aspects rather, of our immigration law today from a historical perspective. Let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence. I don't know how many of you have read the whole thing. It's, you know, when the Declaration of Independence talks about when in the course of human events, and then it lists all the things that the colonists or the founders of our country were upset about what the king did. And one of those things was he has prevented immigration to the colonies. So our very founding document, the Declaration of Independence, complained that the king was keeping people from coming to America because our founders knew that to grow as a country, we needed new blood. We needed the energy, the ideas, the enthusiasm of the risk takers, the people that wanted to come and have a chance. And so that's part of our chartering document. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, says that Congress shall have a uniform system of naturalization. So from there has flowed the concept and legal doctrine that immigration policy and laws must come from the Congress. The executive branch, of course, has power as well. One of the first immigration laws we had passed was called the Alien and Sedition Act. How do you remember the Alien and Sedition Act? Just remember that? The Federalists, late 1700s, they really hated the French. And the French, and they didn't like other immigrants, particularly Catholics. And so they enacted the Alien and Sedition Act, which made it very, very, very difficult to become a U.S. citizen. 14 years it took to become a U.S. citizen. And also, they, for the first time, had a provision for deportation, where the president could sign an order of deportation. Guess how many people President Adams deported? 3. All French, all went back. But those are the first deportations. Over years, our immigration laws have changed. We've developed different systems of green cards and naturalization, different types of visas. But it's also reflected racial prejudice over time. Some of the groups that were really hurt by our immigration laws were the Chinese and the Japanese. Chinese could not become U.S. citizens until the mid-30s, when we needed them as allies against the Japanese. We had things called the Japanese Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which made it very difficult for people from the Orient to become legally in our country. Had other bills and laws that made it very difficult for people from Southern Europe, as opposed to Northern Europe, to become U.S. citizens and legally in our country. The main immigration law we deal with today is called the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA. And it was passed in 1952 over the veto of President Harry Truman. And it provided the basic structure of brother petition for brother, or spouse petition for spouse, and the basic framework of our law. It's been changed a lot since 52, but that's the basic law. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Now, when he was a senator, John F. Kennedy criticized that law because it had quotas that hurt people from Southern Europe and other areas of the world. And so he wrote a book called A Nation of Immigrants, a proposal for changing it. And that was enacted, many of those changes were enacted a year after his death in 1964. The next major piece of legislation that we have was 1986, called IRCA. And a lot of this impacts us today. It's called the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which was signed by Ronald Reagan, passed by a Democratic House and Democratic Senate. And the major component of it was an amnesty, which we call legalization. It wasn't automatic. You had to meet a number of criteria, pay fees, go through a number of steps. But through that, about 3.8 million undocumented people were able to come out of the shadows. And it was a tremendous boost for our economy. Think about what happened through the 90s as our economy grew, as these people were able to come out of the shadows and petition for their family members, then get good Social Security numbers. And what were they doing? I had a lot of clients that would call me up and say, Mr. Berg, I've moved. I said, what do you mean? Well, we were living 3 families to an apartment. Now I can buy my own house because I got a good Social Security number. What did that do to the economy? Tremendous boost to the real estate market. Tremendous boost to many employers that were able to have people work for them. Now another aspect, and was part of the compromise, and incidentally this came out of a commission that was set up by Jimmy Carter in the late 70s. The great Father Hesper, head of Notre Dame, headed up the commission. So another component of it was what we call employer sanctions. And this is something that impacts a lot of our immigrants today. I'm sure it impacts your company. And if you ever apply for a job and you have to fill out an I-9, that's because of the employer sanctions provision of the 1986 law. And what does that say? Well, it says that an employer must have a new employee fill out this form called an I-9 within 3 days of hiring. And the employer is penalized if the employer does not keep those forms or hires people that don't have permission to work. So think about it logically. What's somebody to do if they don't have permission to work? Well, they can make up an identity, they can buy a false card, but that hurts the whole system. But many are forced to do that in order to survive, in order to feed their children. So now what we're seeing is a lot of prosecutions against people who use a false identity or document to try to get a job to feed their kids. But that's the reality of what we're seeing today. After 86, we had another law called Act 90 that was passed November 29, 1990. It tightened up some of the provisions of immigration law, made it easier to deport people, made it tougher to keep people here. But the biggest change in our immigration law that I've seen in my 29 years of practice, and probably in the history of our country, was enacted September 30th, 1996. And it's called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. Some people call it IRA. I call it ARERA, because that rhymes with diarrhea, and that's what I think of that moment. But it's a horrific, horrific bill. And it has things like in it that I know Sister Pat and Sister Joanne deal with. And that's mandatory custody of a whole large group of people. And before I go any further, I have to mention 2 people here. Sister Pat and Sister Joanne, I've been with them every Friday for 6 years, in all kinds of weather in front of Broadview at the detention center. They are the 2 of the bravest, gutsiest women I have ever met, and I think they deserve a huge round of applause. Before I talk a little bit more about Korea, try to bring us up to date on what's happening today. Sister Pat and Sister Joanne go on a regular basis to McHenry County Jail in Woodstock. They live in the far south side, and they make it all the way out there. And they visit and they provide pastoral counseling to immigrants that are being held in McHenry County Jail. Now we have had at least 1 suicide there. It's not a fun place to be locked up in the McHenry County Jail as an immigrant detainee. Now when they first went out there and talked to the warden and said, oh, we want to come out here and provide pastoral counseling. And the reaction was, no, you're not going to do that. But of course, Sister Pat and Sister Joanne never take no for an answer. So what do you think they did? They got a law passed in Springfield that allows them to come in. Took a while, took a lot of no's, but they never took no for an answer. And now there's a law that mandates that people like Sister Pat and Sister Joanne can actually go into the jail, sit across the table from someone being detained, give them pastoral counseling, and they have put literally thousands of dollars in the commissary account, $10 at a time, for people being held in the County Jail. So, Sister Pat, Sister Joanne, thank you for all